We're starting to see continued signs of the impending death of centralization. And it's not just in the legacy systems like PayPal, it's also happening within crypto itself. Get ready. Let's go. As it's becoming more and more clear that the legacy centralized systems won't be able to stand up against the onslaught of decentralization, it's also starting to seem like there are some notions that have been popular within crypto itself up to this point that are probably also too centralized to survive their decentralized counterparts. PayPal at this point is a legacy financial system. Here we have Jose Fernandez de Ponte, PayPal's VP and GM of blockchain, crypto, and digital currencies, straight up letting the world know that PayPal is no longer going to operate as a walled garden. A walled garden is a system where you can go into the system and you can buy assets and you can sell those assets and you can leave the garden, but you cannot go past the garden walls with your asset. So PayPal and Venmo were operating this way. Obviously, we were all super happy when the when PayPal, when Venmo question was answered. And it was kind of predictable that they would try to be a centralized walled garden type system. The reason why you don't want to be participating in a walled garden like this is because in the walled garden, you have to trust that they're not a bucket shop. A bucket shop back in the day was where someone would go out on Main Street, put up a sign that says, "Come buy stocks." Then you go in there, you walk in, you say, "I want to buy Tesla." And they're like, "Sweet, let me sell you Tesla." And they write down on a paper, 500 shares, Tesla, sign it, hand it to you. Then you go out in the world, come back 2 weeks later, and you're like, "Here's my slip. I want to sell my Tesla. It's gone up by $10, or whatever." And they're like, "Sweet," like winking at you. "Give me back your Tesla shares and I will give you the money that corresponds to those shares, minus my small commission." Of course, the implication is they never had Tesla shares, nor did you. They just sold you exposure to those shares. And if you had come to them and said, if and of course they could do this on a fractional reserve basis, which is a huge problem because if everybody comes to buy back their Tesla shares that never actually existed, then and they're operating on a fractional reserve basis, they don't actually have all of the money to sell everyone back their Tesla shares. So in the walled garden crypto context, you are trusting this centralized entity that they're not a bucket shop. That's not good. We don't want to have to trust centralized entities like PayPal and Venmo. So why? Obviously, it's easier for them to operate as a walled garden because they don't ever have to produce the Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash or Litecoin they just sold you, right? They could just operate on a ledger basis. And I'm not implying that they're a bucket shop or that they're doing anything weird fractional reserve wise, but I am saying you have to trust them that when they say when they're like winking at you, right? Like, "I just sold you Bitcoin," you have to trust that they actually have the amount of Bitcoin they say they've sold to everybody. The second they tear down the walled garden walls, you don't have to trust them anymore because when you want your Bitcoin, you can yank it out. Like if it were Cardano you were buying from them, you would yank it out of there and send it immediately to your Daedalus or Yoroi wallets, right? You no longer have to trust that they're not a bucket shop. It would obviously be a lot easier for PayPal and Venmo to operate as a walled garden. Why would they actually agree to do this? Why would they chart that course to tear down the walled garden walls? Because they have to. They're a big organization. The only reason they would do this is because they have to, because they're not taking the crypto world by storm. They're not getting as much adoption as they thought. It turns out that people actually do like using the crypto native exchanges to buy crypto, and they're not like just destroying the competition because they're this old legacy trusted name. They know that in order to compete with decentralization, they can't be as centralized as they have been so far. The legacy systems aren't the only place where we see this happening. Even within crypto itself, we're starting to see that a lot of the notions that have been around up to this point, even within crypto, are too centralized. They're not going to be able to stand up to more decentralized concepts, to their decentralized counterparts. So really interesting exposition of this was Charles talking to Yahoo Finance. So before we jump into it, though, check this out. Yahoo Finance, here's how early you are. Yahoo Finance couldn't even spell Cardano correctly in their tweet of a section of this video. This still frame from the video pretty much says it all. This is Akiko Fujita, Charles, and Zach Guzman. Akiko is stoked to be there. Charles looks stoked to be there. Zach, a much more sour countenance on his face. Zach looks like he's holding a big old bag of Ethereum, and he is not stoked about Cardano knocking on Ethereum's door. And it kind of shows throughout the interview by the way he approaches everything. One thing about Charles, he is not afraid of adversarial situations. The interview started off with a lot of talk about Elon and Bitcoin energy use, all that kind of stuff. And then we got to this point. Here you can see that Akiko still looks pretty stoked. Charles looks focused, and Zach looks like he just ate all the lemons in the world. All the lemons are in his mouth right now. So sour. And that's because he tried to set up kind of an ETH maximalist argument against Cardano. Charles just dismissed it and started giving it to Zach all the reasons why Cardano is going to excel where Ethereum is and will continue to fail. So first, Charles points out that, and Zach, he's kind of like putting up a little bit of a unified Bitcoin and Ethereum front. And so Charles points out, hey, Bitcoin dominance is only 43%. That's because you can't really do much with Bitcoin at this point. All the interesting things that anyone wants to do have to happen in the altcoins. So perfectly natural and logical that Bitcoin's dominance is dropping. Then he starts talking about Bitcoin and Ethereum as a group. There's a lack of an obvious decentralized governance system in both Bitcoin and Ethereum. So in both ecosystems, you've had either a core group of developers or a group of founders and developers. And what Charles points out is, hey, even in Ethereum 2.0, the roadmap for Ethereum 2.0 doesn't include any kind of obvious on-chain governance. The problem with that going forward is that as soon as the founder or the core group of developers of any ecosystem start losing prominence, you don't really have a means of governance. If the community starts rejecting the direction that these individuals want to take, who have the reins over the ecosystem, want to take the ecosystem, you're going to have trouble. If you don't have any kind of on-chain governance, you don't really have any kind of decentralized governance. And if you don't have decentralized governance, what do we call that? If you don't have a representation of the stakeholders, what do we call that? In political science, we have various names for that. It's too inflammatory maybe to go through the list here, but I think you understand where this is going. So Charles makes a really good point. What happens? What happens when the founders and core developers of Bitcoin and Ethereum start losing prominence? Do they suddenly shift to some form of decentralized governance? If that's the plan, then that's kind of a disaster recovery plan, not a real plan for the future. Then Charles talks about geographic centralization. This is another thing that I think has been largely overlooked in the greater space. While Cardano is out there striking deals with Ethiopia, working in a bunch of other countries with plans to onboard 100 million people in the coming years, Charles points out, hey, we would know if Ethereum was doing anything in Africa, we would know about it. And the only place we run into Ethereum or consensus people is in South Africa, right? One of the most developed countries in sub-Saharan Africa, right? They're not in the areas that might see the hyper growth. That's because they're suffering under a notion of geographic centralization, right? It's like Ethereum, most of the founding activities were centered on North America, and probably I don't know what percentage of holders of Ethereum are in North America, Europe, or the most developed countries in Asia, but I would guess an overwhelming majority are in those countries, and that's where they maintain their focus. Right? They're looking at where the puck is, not where the puck's going to be. Whereas Cardano doesn't have this notion of geographic centralization in the first world and developed world. They're like, let's go where the puck is going to be. Let's be in Africa. Let's look at Southeast Asia. Let's be in Mongolia. Let's be in the Caucasus. They're trying to expand to the entire world. I won't try to make the case for hyper growth in the developing world. Macroeconomists and demographers have already done that for us. So go check out all the work that's already been done on that. The Ethereum 2.0 roadmap also appears to be suffering from a type of coin centrism. The Ethereum 2.0 roadmap doesn't seem to display any kind of appetite for interoperability. And most of the other Gen 3 coins, the serious ones, they're assuming that interoperability is going to be a threshold requirement. You're going to have side chains and other forms of interoperability, like in Cardano. But Ethereum doesn't seem to have much of an appetite for that. And again, it's this sort of like central thinking. Ethereum is the hub, right? Ethereum is the hub. Everything's going to happen in Ethereum. Whereas a more decentralized thought process would lead you to believe, hey, maybe it's going to be a little bit balkanized. Maybe there will be, many players on the scene, each with their own little fiefdom, but the fiefdoms that are interoperable with other ones will be the ones that prosper. And that kind of thinking doesn't seem to be going on in Ethereum, where there's more of this notion of coin centrism. Charles also goes into great detail about the advantages of Cardano's extended unspent transaction output system versus the more account balanced style system in Ethereum, and specifically the piece that we've covered in detail on this channel about how scripts in the Cardano EUTXO system can only observe local state of the system, whereas the scripts in Ethereum are extremely powerful and can observe the global state of the entire system. Charles points out how the local state system basically has sharding almost built right in, whereas Ethereum is having a really hard time trying to figure out how they're going to achieve sharding. Finally, at the end, after Charles has pointed out all the ways in which Ethereum's more centralized thinking is starting to fail it, Charles points out, hey, this is a discussion and everybody's free to disagree. This is the first point in the interview that I noticed Zach over here smiling. Meanwhile, Akiko looks like she's looking at the ground thinking to herself, was this a discussion or a slaughter? But Zach's happy because he feels like he's free to disagree in his mind with everything Charles just said. Don't forget, guys, today is the May Cardano 360, where we can all learn all about Cardano's very decentralized future, all the excellent things that are going to go on in between now and Alonzo. I will see you there, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.